And good afternoon today. I'm Laura Goldman, the dietitian with Premier Weight Loss, and it's my pleasure to speak with you again this week and do another presentation, keeping with the love theme of this month. And we'll discuss falling in love with food again and how to eat well on GLP-1s, hopefully without the guilt, because we're trying to reestablish a new relationship with food and definitely a healthier relationship with food. And remember, it's our weekly mantra, but remember that it is the quality of your calories that matters. So even though we're falling in love with food again, and that means that we can fall in love with some favorite foods that may not be considered the highest of quality calories, we want to make sure that 80% of the time we're hitting those high quality calories so we can feel safe and good about also allowing ourselves that 20% of enjoyment throughout the week. So what we're covering today is GLP-1s and your relationship with food, how it might change a little bit, tuning into hunger and fullness cues. We're going to talk about that balanced plate a little bit more. Also, a few tips or discussions on enjoying your favorite foods without the guilt, hopefully, and a couple challenges for the week, as well as time for any questions that you may have. So first, you may already be aware, but it's always nice to reiterate some of this. GLP-1s and how you relate to food, a lot of it is more about your physical relation to food, of course, such as feeling fuller faster, having your appetite a little bit decreased, and perhaps not having those cravings between meals, like I'm feeling like a snack right now. A lot of this is a factor of just that's the physical response that you're going to have as a side effect. But I think other people then also are able to become a little more aware of your hunger cues and fullness and those sudden feelings of, oh, I'm not hungry right now, or recognizing, oh, I am hungry right now. And a lot of times when people are on these GLP medications, the reports from patients who are taking them have shown a significant reduction in eating past that point of feeling full. I know most of us have been there where we've eaten definitely more than we meant to. And so thankfully, the consensus tends to be where people are not reaching that uncomfortably full situation as often once they're on GLP-1s. Some changes that you may notice as well are those reduced cravings, or I'm sure you've heard described food noise, where there's sort of this constant thinking about food in terms of what we want to eat next, perhaps. And some people also, this one is a little bit maybe surprising, is that the preferences for certain foods may change. People have reported that they don't have as much of a desire for high fat foods. Some people don't want their sweet foods anymore, but also there's a reduced desire for salty and spicy as well. And so this one surprised me. It sounds like some people don't find dairy quite as appealing, which would explain that if people have gotten tired of those standard protein shakes, they probably don't seem very appealing when they have sort of a dairy element to them. So those might be some changes you've noticed as well. So with all these changes, with the reduced cravings, the reduced food noise, that hunger cue, this is your opportunity to tune into your body and focus more on when you are thinking about foods and what to eat, focus in on what those foods are that are most nourishing for you. Since we talked about the changing hunger and fullness cues, you may have seen this hunger scale that I have on the left here, but I do recognize that it may be harder to realize when you are dealing with true hunger. And that can be risky because I think for many people, this lack of hunger can feel somewhat freeing, but it can also make people lean into the idea of let's not eat because that means there's no calories, which means I'm going to lose weight. And that can sometimes be the driving force for some people. But it's very, very important that you still do need to feed and nourish your body because the primary purpose of food is to keep our body functioning and keep us moving. The second function, at least in my opinion, is for the pleasure factor, the enjoyment factor, which is allowed. But we need to remember that just because we're not seeking out that pleasure factor, we still do need to seek out nourishing foods. So, again, while recognizing hunger and fullness cues may be difficult, sometimes using something like this hunger scale may be helpful because even if you're only feeling a 4 when it's around lunchtime, you can still allow yourself to eat until you get to maybe a 6. So it doesn't have to be a whole lot of food, but still making sure that we're not skipping meals if at all possible. You can also check in with yourself with some subtle cues. Are you feeling lightheaded? I've realized that for some people that means maybe not enough carbohydrates along with protein at a meal. Or if you're low energy, that could also be just a lack of calories in general. Or if your mood is changing. I'm not really a fan of the term or the word hangry, just I don't, on my ears, it doesn't sound good, but it is very descriptive in being irritable when hungry. And some people can be very irritable because they're hungry, but not recognize being hungry. So if you have a trusted friend or family member who's willing to tell you when you might be acting a little more irritable, that would be also a helpful way to help tune in to whether it's time to really eat. And like I said, you want to avoid skipping meals, so set those regular meal times and aim for that consistency. Even if you are not feeling desperately hungry, but you know that it is time to eat and it's been a few hours since you've had anything, try to eat or drink something. It does not have to be huge, and I certainly don't want you to make yourself feel sick. But if even it's a half of maybe 4 ounces of a Fairlife protein drink, or if it's an apple with a little bit of peanut butter, that is perfectly fine with me. It's just about trying to have that consistency still in your plan. Also, when we're talking about making sure we're getting enough nourishing foods, we have emphasized a few times having that balanced plate. And there is definitely that picture coming up. But when we're talking about balancing the plate, we know that protein comes first. And also, though, since we are trying to get a balanced plate, but also find some balance in our enjoyment of food, just remember our goal is to allow ourselves to enjoy food while meeting your health and nutrition goals. So protein may not necessarily be a favorite food for everyone, but I do know some people do love a good filet or a good steak or piece of well-cooked fish. So you can also focus on those. But one of the main reasons we emphasize protein is because while losing weight, even if you're not using a GLP-1, there will be a loss of some muscle mass. So we want to avoid losing more muscle mass than necessary. And that's why we want to focus at trying to get in 20 or 30 grams of protein with every meal. Also, muscle cannot necessarily form in a vacuum, so physical activity of some sort, especially resistance training, as tolerated, is very important to help continue to maintain or build some muscle. Another important component of balancing your plate, but also still enjoying your food, is we want to avoid nutrient deficiencies as much as possible. Some of the top nutrients of concern are vitamin D, B12, and iron and calcium. According to one paper, there were about 20% of patients were shown to have a nutritional deficiency after taking a GLP-1 medication for a year. So it's definitely not that uncommon that there may be a nutrient deficiency. By all means, I like to recommend food first to try and get in those nutrients. And to make sure that you're getting enough, whenever possible, try and at least have an annual blood work check if that's part of your health regimen. There are some physical signs of certain deficiencies that you can notice, but usually that's when the deficiencies are becoming slightly more severe. So regular monitoring of blood work can help identify those deficiencies before they become problematic. And of course, it is worthwhile to consider a high quality multivitamin supplement if necessary. I am someone who is not a supplement pusher by any means, but sometimes if calorie intake is low enough, there is a worthwhile aspect to that if we're looking at getting in a multivitamin. And by all means, you can ask the Premier Weight Loss staff or myself about some good brands. I know that surprisingly, or maybe not so much, Costco's Kirkland brand tends to be well regarded and passes well in third-party testing. So if you visit Costco at all, their multivitamin might be worth considering for just one example, but there's plenty more out there. As I said, the plate was going to be making an appearance. I've done a version of this plate in a few other presentations, so hopefully it will look very familiar. But this is an example of how to build that plate. And of course, it's about protein being a quarter of it, fiber-rich carbs, which would be in this starch section, healthy fats, which are in liquid form, most definitely, and colorful vegetables, which ideally would take up about 50% of your plate or bowl. I am a realistic person, though I know that there are some meals where getting 50% of veggies is just not going to happen. Breakfast is a pretty good example of that. Normally 9 times out of 10, I'm not having vegetables at my breakfast meal. However, if I'm having something with eggs, I do aim to get in some non-starchy vegetables. So weekends is the exception, but that's why you want to focus on that on some of your main meals, if at all possible. I did want to mention, though, this I haven't touched on as much when I'm talking about building a plate, and that's with managing GI side effects. So when people have nausea, maybe vomiting or potentially some diarrhea side effects, some of the foods that contribute to this more often than not are the greasy foods. So if you think about deep fried or extra butter, as well as ultra processed foods or high sugar foods. Those are the ones where people tend to report more unfortunate side effects or feelings and feeling sick. So the focus is on whole grains and fiber, as well as water and lean protein and fruits and veggies. I will pause and mention, though, I do know that usually it's the ultra processed or sugary foods that might be a favorite treat that you've been actively avoiding and would like to at least incorporate. And that still is possible. It's just we want to make sure that we limit it, not eliminate. And so I think it's very important to remember that I'm using the word limit, not avoid or stay away or eliminate. So as long, again, as it's more the 20% of your life versus the 80% of your life when eating, we can work with that, and that should hopefully help you avoid any of those side effects. And that's an appropriate segue to go to the idea and hopefully to help you fall in love with your food, to move past the good and bad food labels. I think that the reason I have this image of someone attending confession is that I think some people feel like if they come and speak to me, they are almost confessing to a priest if they've eaten one quote unquote bad item. And I want to allay those fears because I do not feel like I I approach this from a judgment-free zone, as anyone should, because we all enjoy foods that wouldn't necessarily be considered health food. Remember that these can fit in your diet with a balanced approach. I sometimes like to say there's not really such a thing as a bad food, maybe bad amounts, or phrased another way, the portion makes the poison. So yes, having large amounts of cakes or donuts, that's not necessarily going to work in your diet plan if this is a common occurrence, but we can still allow ourselves to enjoy from time to time. Also, it's very important to avoid labeling foods in general as good or bad because that can oftentimes lead to guilt over food choices. And it may make you avoid some favorite foods. And sometimes, depending on who is telling you or who is giving these labels as good or bad, it can also make you avoid otherwise healthy foods. There are some people who consider tomatoes to be a bad food or bad for you because of some of the compounds in it. Professionally, I disagree with this take. And so just remember that these labels are oftentimes arbitrary and may not have any basis in reality. So I say avoid them altogether, and that way it can help you have that food freedom because you can still have your favorite foods in those moderate portions. And just remember that when you are eating these foods you enjoy, since they can be sort of once in a while, make sure that you have sort of a mindful and intentional enjoyment. Take the time to savor it and be in the moment with your favorite foods so that way you don't have it just pass you by like an instant. And we're already down to the challenges of the week. So, challenge number 1, I know this one has been on the agenda a few times, but we're looking at prioritizing that protein. And so I tried to change it a little bit in that instead of just focusing on protein first at each meal, which is an option, although I do need to correct that spelling there. But also, if that's already locked and loaded and you're good with that, aim for a protein shake or snack after any resistance training you might have. Try to get that within 30 minutes after your resistance training, and that will help you retain that muscle and help build that muscle back. Challenge number 2 is to try and do some mindful eating of a favorite food of yours. So pick out a favorite food that you've been avoiding and allow yourself to eat it and enjoy it, but in a way that allows you to savor it. I say think like a food critic. If you have a piece of paper to write down, take the time to analyze the flavor and the texture. Write about why you like it. How does it feel? How does it taste? Is it hot or cold? And if you can take at least 5 minutes to eat the whole thing, then that will allow you to savor it and enjoy it versus it disappearing very quickly. And at the end, ask yourself, how much would I rate this? Would I give it 5 out of 5 stars, or is it more just a 2 out of 5 stars? And the reason why I ask about this is because if it is a 5 out of 5, I think that is something that's very worth keeping in your rotation of foods. But if it ends up not being as delicious as you might remember or thought it was, don't waste your time or your calories on only an okay special treat, and allow yourself to enjoy a truly special treat. So to put this all together, remember to take this time as an opportunity to reconnect with your food, because now with the appetite signals being changed and maybe a little less distraction, you have the chance to really tune into what you're eating and why you're eating it. Remember, though, that protein and high quality foods are still essential for health, still essential to eat. We cannot achieve health by just eliminating calories altogether. And as I said initially, food, yes, is meant for nourishment, but we are also allowed and should enjoy our foods. And just remember, these small and focused and consistent changes can help us build those sustainable habits as our days and years go on. And with that, I will leave this time open for any questions that you may have. Feel free to hit the bottom question mark at your screen if it's there. I believe that's where it is. You can ask anonymously or with your name, and I'd be happy to answer questions about this topic or any other nutrition-related topic that comes to mind. All right, and with that, I appreciate everyone for stopping by this afternoon. I hope you all have a fantastic week. And if you have questions that come up later, by all means, feel free to ask the Premier Weight Loss staff and they can get you in touch with me. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.